Today, we're diving into one of the toughest life transitions that people face, divorce, and specifically what it means for your home. Because your house is rarely just a house. It's often your biggest asset, your biggest expense, and the place that's most tied to your emotions, your kids, and your sense of stability. And when a marriage ends, people often feel stuck, asking questions like, do you sell? Does one spouse stay? Can you even afford to keep it? And what are your actual legal and financial obligations, not what you hope they are? So today I brought in a family law expert, Marco Brown from Brown Family Law, to walk through what people need to understand, what options really exist, and where things tend to go wrong. Now, Marco is a Utah family law attorney, and he has a staff of Arizona attorneys right here in Mesa. So let's talk about what happens when the love is gone, but the house isn't. Today on State 48 Homeowner.
Hi, I'm Kenny Klaus, and this is State 48 Homeowner.
Now, one of the biggest mistakes people make is starting with the wrong question. They start with, who gets the house? But that's not the question that matters most. The real starting point is affordability, because once one household becomes two, everything changes.
Really, I want them thinking about whether or not they're going to have the means after they get divorced to keep the home. They need to understand that it costs about 40% more, or maybe more now with rents and mortgages going up, to live apart than it does to live together. And they need to know their numbers and their income so they can make that determination. But that needs to be figured out right at the very beginning of the process.
And when people don't start there, they fall into some very common assumptions. One of the biggest is thinking that the house will somehow stay the same, that one person will be able to keep it, that the kids will stay, and everything else will just work around that one decision.
I think the first one is that they'll be able to keep the house even after the divorce. Almost nobody can do that because almost nobody can afford it. Many times women will think that their ex-husbands will allow them to live in the house with the kids for years on end. And that almost never happens. I think I've had that happen maybe twice, maybe 5 times in my entire career of helping 5,000 people through divorce. So that's a big misconception that we have to talk about in the beginning with people.
The reason the house becomes such a central issue isn't just money. It's emotion, it's kids, it's fear of disruption. But emotion doesn't change the legal framework. And that's where people get blindsided. For one thing, in Arizona, divorce follows community property law. That surprises a lot of people.
So Arizona law, and I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not an Arizona attorney. I'm a Utah attorney with lawyers in Arizona. But Arizona law considers really anything that is acquired during the marriage, the exception of a few things, as community property. Okay. And those few things are really, you get inheritance or a gift from family or something along those lines. Those would be separate property, or property that you had before you got married would also be separate. But pretty much anything that's acquired during the marriage is going to be community property, including businesses.
That applies to homes too, even when people think that paperwork protects them. Some people think, only one spouse is on the loan or on the title. I'm free and clear.
Name on stuff doesn't matter in divorce, and it doesn't matter in a community property state either. So what really matters is that marital funds were used for the home and it was acquired during the marriage.
Even when somebody owned the home before the marriage, that doesn't always mean the house stays untouched.
Those 10 years previous to the marriage, those are all yours. All that accrual in the house and the equity and whatnot, that's yours. Then the 10 years after the marriage, when you're putting marital money into the mortgage and the repairs and everything, that accrual is 50-50. So what we do is we go value those 2 time frames and then we split it up like that.
So Marco, what documentation do you wish people had ready before they even come talk to you?
The documents that I really want to see that almost nobody has is kind of the full panoply of your financial documents. So it's income, mortgage statements, bank statements, retirement, any assets, any debts, these sorts of things. If you can put that together and bring that in to us, that's kind of a best case scenario for us as divorce attorneys. If you don't have that, that's fine. We can get that. But if you have it and we can have that conversation right up front, it's fantastic. It allows us to know pretty much what's going to happen financially in your case right from the very beginning and really speeds up the process.
When it comes to the house, most divorces land in one of a few buckets. So let's walk through those. Selling is the most common outcome, not because people want to, but because financially, it's often the only viable path.
Selling is the default. About 95% of people sell the home simply because they can't afford to keep it after they get divorced. So, I mean, it makes the most sense almost all the time because they simply can't afford it.
The hardest part of selling usually isn't the math, the house prep, or the moving boxes. It's generally the emotions.
One of the very unfortunate things is that you're selling your home, and that's very emotionally difficult, especially if you have kids, right? Because the kids are going to have to move somewhere else. So they almost always need to move schools, and it becomes much harder to, find that, stay in the neighborhood or find another good neighborhood because you're going to have two families, and you're almost never going to be able to buy a home that's as good as the one you had during the marriage. So you end up like going down in neighborhood, which is really difficult on people in general, but especially the kids.
The second option is one spouse keeping the house. That sounds really simple, but it rarely is.
In order to facilitate one spouse keeping the home, really you have to get the other person off the mortgage. So you'll almost always refinance the mortgage and pay the other person out. And then just not that many people can do it. They almost always do it because there's a family member that comes in and co-signs on a loan, or there's just some rich family member like dad who will just pay the entire thing off.
And even when it's possible financially, there are two major blind spots.
I think the first thing is, do you really want one spouse keeping the house? Because sometimes you don't. You don't want that person living in that house. That was the marital home, and it might seem like a good idea, but you're a human and you get kind of petty, right? And you don't want the other person living in there. And then the second, again, is the money. Like, are you actually going to be able to afford this? You always have rose-colored glasses on when you're going through divorce. And I've seen a lot of people get in way over their head with a home and trying to keep it, or buying another one that's just too expensive. And then the next 5 or 10 years after divorce are very, very difficult economically.
Then we have option C. It's a deferred sale or co-ownership. This is the option people really want to believe will work, holding the house together for the kids.
So almost always you do this because you want the kids to finish school somewhere. So maybe you have a sophomore or a junior in high school and you want to get them through their senior year. So that's really the pro. The con is that you own a home with your ex and you don't get along particularly well. Otherwise you'd still be married. So, exes, I've had this situation where one person lives in the home with the kid, and then the ex, who is still on there, like they'll just come into the home all the time, because it's still technically their home, but they're not living there, and it creates huge amounts of problems.
And the spouse who leaves often pays the hidden price.
I think the biggest risk is for the spouse that doesn't stay but is still tied to the mortgage. Their debt to income ratio is so high that it's almost impossible for them. It's like really impossible for them to buy another house. So they're in some junky apartment or, a condo or something, along those lines. And then a lot of times the kids will not want to go over to that house because somebody has the home where the kids live. And then the other person has this junky little apartment.
I was going kind of for a refugee motif, fleeing my homeland kind of thing.
This option is almost always a bad idea. I tell my people, please don't do this unless it's essentially a year. So your kid is a senior or finishing up a junior year and you just want to get them through the senior year. But that's the only time that seems to make sense to me. They usually can kind of put up this for a year, but after a year, it really starts to break down. Nesting is also a bad idea. If people are familiar with that, that's when the child lives in the home and each parent lives in the home for a period of time and then switches out. That's an even worse idea. That literally never lasts past 6 months.
And what do you see happening when people are nesting that becomes problems? What are the worst case scenarios?
The worst case scenarios are, and I see this unfortunately a lot, people will start putting in cameras in the home so they can spy on each other. And it's so bad. You'll be dating right after the divorce, and then someone's spying on you, like, watching you date in the house. It's so terrible. The other is, so you'll be in there for a week, say, and then you go to an apartment and the other person comes back in and then talks about how much of a slob you are because you haven't cleaned the house adequately for him or her. That happens all the time. Another one is you're there during the week and the other person just comes in and out and doesn't give you the space that you need. That happens a lot. It just never functions. So just don't do it.
Then we have option D. This is really a less formal option, but it's where one spouse just refuses to cooperate. The divorce is happening, but they won't participate in the home sale. Generally in a divorce, if one party has a mentality that they're going to try to win by making everything difficult, nobody wins.
Usually what we'll do is we'll go back to the court and say, hey, this person's playing ball. We can't get the house sold. And the judge will reprimand that person and, say, hey, look, I'm going to charge you fees. I'm going to evict you if you don't do this. And usually they do, but sometimes they don't. They just don't want to play ball ever. And then we literally have to go evict them, and they're paying, $10,000, $15,000 worth of eviction fees and attorney's fees just to get them outside the house so we can sell it.
All right. So let's talk about the part that nobody wants to hear, but everybody needs to understand. The law could say one thing, and the mortgage company can still say no. In a divorce, people might make a plan that sounds totally logical. Something like, you keep the house, I'll move out, and we'll just handle it. But your lender isn't obligated to take any action because of your divorce decree. The bank really only cares about who is on the note. So I'm bringing in Steve Farrington. He's a lending and finance expert from Unity Home Loans because this is his department.
So here's the simplest way to understand mortgage qualification. A lender is looking at three big buckets: income, debt, credit. And divorce can change all three at the same time. Now, most people feel this immediately. If you're still tied to the mortgage, the payment is still counted against you in your debt to income ratio, or DTI, unless the loan can be removed from your name or excluded under specific documentation rules. And that's why someone can move out, start paying rent on another property, and then find out they can't qualify for their next home purchase.
Can you use spousal support as income when you're trying to qualify for a mortgage?
Oh yeah, spousal support and child support can count as qualifying income, but it has to be documented properly. And lenders or banks need confidence that it's going to continue. For example, Freddie Mac, their guidance requires documentation and an expectation that support will continue for at least the next 3 years. And that documentation includes 6 months receipt of full payment fulfilling that support order. Now, translation, I'm pretty sure my ex will pay, doesn't work. Lenders want the court order, the terms, and proof it's being paid consistently.
And this is where people get blindsided. Because a couple can agree emotionally, even legally, but when you run it through lending guidelines, it might not even be possible to do what both parties agree to do. So let's talk about one of the biggest forks in the road. Steve, how quickly can someone refinance?
Oh, Scott, the honest answer is as soon as they can qualify. But qualifying is the whole issue, because during divorce, your income may be changing. Your debt picture may be unclear, and your credit can definitely take hits.
What if rates are worse now?
This is one of the biggest pain points we see. The party applying can only use their own income and their own credit score to qualify now. If the current interest rate environment is higher than the rate you have now, refinancing to remove a spouse from the mortgage could mean a higher rate, a higher payment, and sometimes this deal simply doesn't work anymore. And that's when keep the house plan could collapse, not because anyone did anything wrong, but because the math changed.
What if one spouse can't refinance?
Well, then you have a few outcomes. Because if you're still both on the mortgage, you're still both exposed. This is also where homeowners report running into problems with their current loan servicer, including potential pressure to refinance into a new higher interest loan. There's delays or confusion around assumption paperwork and options. So if refinancing isn't possible, the plan needs a backup. Timing, sale, release of liability, assumption, keep the mortgage as is, or even you could rent out the property.
Now let's talk about the credit side, because this is where people can get hurt even when they're trying to be cooperative. Here's the key point. If your name is still on the mortgage, you're still liable for the debt. So if payments get missed, even if it's just once, it's not their problem. Your credit may be affected as well. And one of the most common traps is thinking, I'm not living there, so I'm not worried about it. No, if you're still on the mortgage, you're still liable.
Now, here are some practical ways to protect both sides. Number one, do not rely on they're going to pay it. If you're still on the mortgage, you need a plan that doesn't depend solely on trust. Two, understand debt exclusions. These are rare and they're document heavy. In some cases, a lender may be able to exclude a debt from your DTI or debt to income ratio if the other party has made the payments for a documented period. Now, Fannie Mae guidance on this requires obtaining the most recent 12 months or proof of payments from the other party with no delinquencies and full payment to exclude certain debts from your DTI. Translation, this isn't a quick fix. It's a document heavy and it's not something to assume will work without a lender reviewing your exact scenario. Number three, keep your payments current no matter what. Even in chaos, protect your credit first. Number four, build a timeline with an out. If the plan is a refinance, you need a realistic deadline. If the refinance fails, you need a fallback plan defined up front. And number five, talk to your lender early, not after the decree, not after you move out, early, so you know what's possible and what isn't.
Most bad housing decisions in divorce don't come from bad intentions. They come from emotion.
I tell people all the time, you shouldn't make a big decision until at least 6 months after you get done with your divorce, because you're emotionally compromised during your divorce.
A phrase we hear all the time is, I'll just stay here until I figure things out.
Yeah, that's not going to work in any way, shape, or form. You're going to get kicked out. You're going to hate the other person while you're, going through all of this. Like you have to have a plan. If you don't have a plan, it's going to devolve very, very quickly.
Another trap is emotionally checking out before the finances are settled.
This will happen a lot, especially guys will do this. They will just be finished and they will want to get out. And what that leads to is they will just leave tons of money on the table for their wife, because the wife wants the money out of the house. They're like, all right, fine. I don't want to fight about these things. I'm just walking away emotionally. And they're going to give the lion's share to their wife. So that's actually it's a very, very dangerous thing to do.
Here's the practical roadmap. Know the mortgage, title, equity, and affordability. Talk to a family law attorney early. Talk to a lender before assuming anything. Talk to an agent about market conditions and put everything in writing: title, mortgage, division, and timeline. So Marco, if people were to do things on their own, like a civilized, friendly divorce, sitting down at the kitchen table, no attorneys, why should they still have it reviewed by a family law attorney before finalizing the divorce?
I mean, it's important because you're going to come up with an agreement, but that agreement may not be legal at all. For example, child support. A lot of people will say, well, we won't do child support at all. Well, you can't negotiate child support. It's not yours. It's not your spouse's. It's your kids. So if the child support is a part of the negotiation itself, and you're taking away money somewhere or adding money somewhere because of child support, that's not going to work. Like that doesn't function in the negotiation because you can't actually negotiate child support. But you wouldn't know that. Like there's no way you know that sort of thing because you're not a lawyer, right? And the other thing is, even you're not just completely and totally wrong about it, your assumptions are completely and totally wrong. There are 1,000 reasons that you should go to an expert, even if you've come to an agreement with your spouse. Make sure that it's on the up and up.
And finally, there are legal experts who have spent time in classrooms, courtrooms, they've got degrees, and they've passed the bar. Then there are expert lay people in your family and on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube. It's probably worth a quick review to pay attention to who you're talking to and to verify that they and you are correct in your assessment.
You may have in your head that things are going to work out a certain way, and that because you heard that from your Aunt, Julie or something, and Aunt Julie's full of crap. She has absolutely no idea what she's talking about because she got this from some TikTok video somewhere, right? So don't do that sort of thing. You want to take it into an expert no matter what you do, because you may just be completely and totally wrong about it.
Your home can be a stabilizing force, or it can be a major source of conflict. Planning makes all the difference. Before you make a decision, especially in a moment of stress, talk to a professional. Talk to Marco's Arizona team at Brown Family Law at 480-882-0767. Talk to Steve Farrington at Unity Home Loans at 480-215-5590. And talk to a trusted real estate advisor with experience in family law sales. The Klaus team isn't just experienced in navigating home sales during divorce. We're also special commissioners with Maricopa County, often appointed by the court in situations where a sale is mandated by the court and one or both parties aren't cooperating. And that experience matters because sometimes the difference between resolution and years of conflict is having the right people involved early. You don't have to navigate this alone. We've got a team in place. Just give us a call, 480-354-7344. And stay tuned for other topics in this When Things Go Wrong series. What happens to your house after death, and how can you prepare? What happens later in life when our parents or you find that it's time for a senior life transition, and how can you prepare? Subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you get notified when we release those upcoming episodes. And thanks for joining us this week on State 48 Homeowner, and go make it a great day. Thanks for spending time with us this week at State 48 Homeowner, the ins and outs of owning an Arizona home. You can connect with us for more information, submit topics you'd like us to further discuss. You can see relevant videos, give us feedback, answer your real estate questions, and more at state48homeowner.com.